There we go. Okay. So thank you guys so much for joining. I am going to launch right into it. I recognize this is the middle of everyone's day. It's lunchtime for the majority of us. So thank you so much for joining. This is the first time that we've done something like this sort of in this format. So Andrew and I will introduce ourselves in a few minutes, and we're going to dive into a little bit of why we're doing this, what it's all about. And then we're going to be asking you guys some questions as we go along as well. So I'm going to kick it off. First off, if you're not in the right place, if you're thinking of going to the Canada Games as a coach, or you've been named as a coach or a manager, or you're involved with a team, welcome. You're in the right place. So we will be talking about the 2023 Winter Games in PEI, and you found the right place. If you don't know what we're talking about, maybe you're not in the right webinar, but hopefully you guys are all in the right place. All right. So welcome to this session. So what is this series about? Really, this series started with hearing a lot of feedback over the last couple Canada Games from all of our Atlantic Canadian partners. So I'm Natasha, and I'll introduce myself more formally, but I'm with the Canadian Sport Institute Atlantic, based in Halifax. So we do work with coaches in all 4 Atlantic provinces. So we have our partners in New Brunswick, in Newfoundland, in PEI, and in Nova Scotia. And over the last couple of years, and especially following up with this summer games that we just completed this year, we were hearing a lot of feedback with coaches not having all the information they would have wished to have coming into the games. So we have, looking at the registration list for today, as an example, we have a vast amount of experience, even on today's call, because I do recognize some of the names. So there's coaches on this call that have multi-Canada games experience, as well as perhaps other games experience, other multi-sport games experience. For those coaches, this series, we hope, will still be helpful. It'll still be a reminder, but it'll be very much information that you've probably learned on your own over the past couple games that you've attended. The goal of these series is really for our first and maybe second time coaches to ensure that you feel ready to have the information that you require, especially for someone going to their first games. It's really not sure what the difference is between a major games like this, a major multi-sport games, and what you've experienced in the past. We hope to speed up that learning process, and that's the goal of this webinar series. You'll see from those that are joining online, we are offering this to our Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia Canada Games coaches for the winter. So you're currently online with a big mix of colleagues that you'll get to meet in PEI, and hopefully you guys will start to recognize each other over the next 3 webinars, see some names, make some connections. So that would be pretty cool as well. Today's session, we're going to get into a couple topics, and you'll see that in a minute. The next session, to include as well, these are all recorded. So if for some reason an assistant coach, a coach that you work with, a manager isn't able to jump on, register in the locker anyway, and we will send the recording out to everyone who is in the locker registered following the session. Our next session is November 17th. Same time. We just kept it consistent. So it's at 12 o'clock in the middle of the day. And then our final session will be December 8th. So you can write those down in your calendar now. I will ask again, we have a lot more people in the room now. So if you've just jumped on, if you could rename yourself in Zoom, and this is our way of kind of introducing each other, and for some of you that I don't know and Andrew doesn't know, introducing yourselves to us as well. If you could rename yourself with your name, your sport, and your province, that would be awesome. And then take a look through the participation list for all of you guys and try to kind of maybe recognize some in your sport or in your province, because we look forward to getting to know you as well. So lastly, before I turn it over to Andrew for a sec, who am I? So my name's Natasha Johnson, for those that I haven't gotten to meet in person or online yet. I do recognize lots of names. So hello, again, no one has their camera on, but I do see names. So hello to those that I do know. We're happy to be here today. I'm excited to see you guys, see your names anyway. So what are my games experience? I went to the Canada Games as an athlete, actually in a discipline that is no longer in the Canada Games, so rhythmic gymnastics back in the day. And then I was lucky to attend 4 games as coaches. So I do have multi-games experience, and I feel extra lucky because I got to go for both a coach and a winter sport 3 different times and see how that changed over the period. And then a summer games as an assistant coach. So I've gotten to see the games from a few different lenses, both head coach, assistant coach, medal winning, not medal winning. I've gotten the vast amount of experience, as well as an athlete. And then the last 2 games, I was in this role of coach support, just supporting coaches coming into the games. Didn't get to go to the last 2 games due to 2 different circumstances that were out of my control, but unfortunately have gotten to go to lots as a coach. And then also have been to World Games, World Multi-Sport Games, the university games. So bring that kind of very similar to the Canada Games, but at a slightly larger international scale as well. So we'll be utilizing some of what we've learned over those experiences in today's webinar. And I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime, Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Natasha. Similarly, it's great to see so many faces. Shout out to the curling coaches. That's my sport, and I'm super excited to see a few of them on board. So my name is Andrew. My title with the Institute is Coach and Lead for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Mentorship. But one of my roles, I'm very thrilled and honored to get to support you coaches as we lead up to the Canada Games next winter in PEI. So the games in PEI will be 5th. I was trying to figure this out on the drive over. There are going to be my 5th or 6th games. I've gone as an athlete, gone as an assistant coach. I've been a volunteer lead for when the games were here in Halifax in 2011, and I've attended 2 games. So there we go. I answered my own question. I've been to 2 games as a mission staff with Team Nova Scotia. So all that to say, not that by any means that Natasha and I are experts, but what I can say is that we've seen a lot of things. And while we are here to educate, more importantly, we are here to tell you about what we've seen and really try our best to assist you in avoiding some of the negative things that we've seen during our times at the games and prepare you as best as possible. So with that, I will pass it back over to Natasha.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And Andrew really nailed it in that we feel we're here as facilitators to speed up learning, and we will be drawing out from some of the experience that we know is in this group. And that, yeah, nobody has all the answers. Every single game's experience is different. So that is a real thing. So quickly, who is here in the room? Please have a look through that list, but I have it in front of me. So I'll share that we have curling. We have lots of curling coaches, so welcome. I see a bunch from Nova Scotia already. We have freestyle snowboard coaches. We have ringette, archery, I think boxing, a couple from boxing have joined. We have speed skating, figure skating, artistic gymnastics, karate, biathlon, and a couple who haven't put their sports in yet. And I do know we have a couple coaches from PEI. We have our partner Manon here with Coach New Brunswick, and a group of coaches from Nova Scotia. So a really diverse group joining today. So again, welcome to all of our Atlantic Canadian coaches and partners. And we'll dive into some content. All right. So who, just using the annotation or like your thumbs up, whatever you want to use on Zoom, if you could let me know, maybe thumbs up would be easiest, who has seen or even better taken the Canada Games training that is now available in the locker? Okay, 2, 3, okay, perfect. That's about what I assumed. Let's try again with who's heard of it? I mean, the 3 that took it, obviously. Yeah, a couple more. Okay, this was our concern. So I'm going to launch off with the CAC did take the time about a year ago to put together a really great Canada Games training. And I think this is something that's been needed for a long time. This has definitely been an underserviced area. In the past, I know coming into my first games, it was like, you are now the head coach, you're going to the Yukon, good luck. You know, and thankfully I'd been there as an athlete, so I had some idea, but we haven't necessarily shared a lot other than the very specifics of this is what your uniform is going to look like, this is what you're going to eat, this is where you're going to sleep. But what does it mean as a coach to prepare for those games? And what are the things that are different about the games from going to, say, a national championship? So the CAC does have this brand new training available. we're going to start off this series by asking that all of you please take the time to do this. We're not going to recover the material in this training. So we are suggesting that you take it and highly encouraging that you take it because it will give you a lot of the base information that you need just coming into the games. So what's the history of the games? They touch very briefly on pre-event planning. So we will dive into a little more detail on that. They'll talk about travel to and from the games, how that's managed really from the Canada Games Council side of things. What is the Canada Games Council? All of these things are included in this training. They talk a little bit about event and team management with no games specifics, right? This is all general for any games experience. They talk about the Canada Games experience competition itself, and then a little bit about some post-event stuff. So this training takes about 45 minutes. When I did it, I just did it fairly recently. It was pretty easy to click through and move through. It's a newer e-learning, so I would say the quality is good. So this snapshot is showing you where to find it in the locker. If you log into your locker profile, you go under e-learning, multi-sport, and you should see it there as a drop down. Just if you need some help navigating it to you or finding it, Andrew and I can help you. But here's a quick snapshot. All right, moving on. Andrew.
Awesome, thank you. So what did you sign up for? Whether you realize it or not, you signed up for a few things. So I'm going to take you on a bit of a roller coaster known as the Canada Games. So first off, it's an absolutely wonderful experience. I personally enjoy interacting with the athletes and interacting with you coaches. And there's always a wow moment or a moment that brings tears to your eyes if you're emotional like I am. It's an absolutely wonderful experience. Now, what I will say is that especially from now leading up to the games in PEI, it is an extremely busy few months leading up to the games, and it is a very busy week, whether you're in week 1 or week 2 at the games. And should you not prepare correctly, it can be a very exhausting period of time. So it's important to keep that in mind. To those of you who've maybe never been to a Canada Games before, but have been to a national championship, I can promise you that this is not a national championship. This is most likely going to be a sport event unlike which you've ever been to before. Not only are you part of a larger team, whether that's Team PEI, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, or Team Nova Scotia, but the atmosphere, the logistics around the multi-sport games is absolutely huge. So when we go to a national championship, for example, you have your 13 teams or however many teams and coaches. I want to say this in the nicest way possible. You and your athletes are one piece of a large program. So we have thousands of athletes that come, and you have to remember that you're just one piece, and that important piece, of course, but one piece. And I'll explain a bit about that in a little bit. And I promise you this will be a test of your planning and communication skills and practices. So at the games is not only your own competition, but there's also viewing other competitions. There's traveling around, viewing things. For example, at the games that just took place in Niagara, all of our athletes at some point in time want to go down to Niagara Falls. So there's arranging that. I know a couple of teams managed to find ways to go to a Blue Jays game. There's all kinds of things that are happening. There's all kinds of things on site that are happening. So planning and communication with athletes, with parents, with everyone is going to be absolutely crucial. Next slide, please, Natasha. Awesome. So let's talk about how it's different. Simply put, a lot of things that you would normally control at, say, a national championships or regional championships, you don't get to control at the Canada Games. So, for example, when it comes to feeding times, at past games, we've seen tickets be handed out for certain meal times, so you can only go in there once to eat. Also at past games, we've seen specific times when you can go eat. Depending on where your venue's at, there's a specific place there to eat, and that could be limited. The bottom line is that you don't necessarily get to control when those feeding times take place, so it's important to build them into the schedule. Also, in terms of transportation and the times around that, A lot of national championships, especially when I was with curling, we would have teams rent vehicles to travel back and forth to the venue. That doesn't really happen in this particular case. You're traveling on a bus, most likely a school bus, and that school bus leaves at a specific time. And if you don't catch that bus at the specific time to go to your venue, it causes a big old headache, and then complications happen. And of course, the stress level rises and the heart rate rises. And really, what we want as coaches is for you to be able to focus on the field of play and focus on the event itself. So it's important to wrap your head around, what time do I need to be on the bus to go to my venue? What time does the bus leave from the venue to go back to the athletes' village after things are over? It's important to keep those in your mind. Meeting spaces. Each province will have a meeting space in PEI, but I can tell you meeting space outside of that is very much at a premium. So plan your meetings in advance, working with your mission staff liaison. He or she will become your best friend, by the way. Working with them to figure out meeting space times, extremely important. In terms of athlete activities, it's very busy. There is a ton going on. There's all kinds of events going in both indoors and outdoors. So what the athletes are doing during their downtime or not doing, it's important to wrap our heads around that. And just things like laundry. Where does laundry take place? How is it accessible? Do I have to pay for it? Is it included? All those sort of things. Again, working with your mission staff liaison or your assistant chef or chef de mission, asking those questions to wrap your head around that is very important. Now, the benefit about this is most of this information, especially around schedules and that, is really starting to pop up online. And actually this week, right now as we speak, Mission Staff Meeting 2 is taking place in PEI. So what will happen, I can't speak for any of the other provinces, but for Nova Scotia, what's going to happen is our assistant chef and chef are going to come back next week. They're going to download all that information to the Mission Staff Liaison, and it will come out over time. But the information that's online, visit the Canada Games website. Find out, get curious, start to think about what are some of the things that I need to know? And if you can't readily find the answer to those questions, reach out to your mission staff and they'll be able to help as well. And I will pass it back over to Natasha.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And you'll see from the example there of just what Andrew went through, there are a lot of things to think about with a multi-games experience. And some of it, we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of laundry and what's accessible and meeting spaces and what's accessible. But what we are going to do is prompt you to start thinking about those things now. We are 4 months out. So the reason the timing of this webinar is what it is so that you have time to start thinking about these things now and putting your planning into practice. We did learn, it was a little bit scary, so I'm going to ask that all of you don't recreate this, but we did learn with multiple coaches coming into the summer games that they were checking the schedule and figuring some of this out either nights before they left or even at the games and saying, well, I didn't understand that bus time, or I didn't quite understand that there was no laundry access. So again, part of this webinar series is to just make you guys aware of maybe what you're not aware of because you don't have the same control, as Andrew said, at the multi-sport games that you might at a national championship. When I know myself as a coach, I would just hop in the rental car and I would get done what I needed to do. And you do realize that at these games experience that's not always possible. So here's just a brief outline of some of the things we're going to go through over the rest of the time that we have together. So today we're going to briefly touch on blocking out some personal time and practicing healthy self habits, and I'll get into why. Finalizing your team roster selection. I'll be asking you guys some questions around that and communicating the rationale. Communicating and setting up the at-games expectations with both the parents, your best friends, and your athletes. Planning the final preparation period prior to the games, as well as surrounding you and your team with support. All right, so I'm going to launch us into self-care. And some of you might be asking, why are we starting this webinar talking about self-care? The reason is, yes, it's extremely important for all of us, but we actually did a large-scale survey with both a pre and post survey to our summer games coaches, managers, assistant coaches here in Nova Scotia. So it was quite a large number. I'm not sure the total number. It was over 50 people that were surveyed that just experienced the 2022 summer games. And lots of questions were involved, planning, selection, a bunch of other things. One of the things that they were asked to grade themselves on both right before, and after the games was their feeling of personal burnout. So, what did the games experience have on the actual coach, like you guys, the coach and the manager? And unfortunately, what the data showed us is that they graded themselves as an F for burnout, both before and after the games. So, not surprising, talking to these coaches, their games experience were delayed a few years. So that definitely, you signed up for one thing as a coach and it got dragged on, and their games experience was longer than expected. But what was really concerning talking to those coaches is that they did find the experience exhausting. And I know for myself, I used to go to the games and really feel that I had to block time when I got home because it is an exhausting experience. I will share with some of you guys as well. If you're going to your first games and this is a volunteer experience, I fully understand that many of you are taking vacation to go to the games. So you're taking vacation from a job to go away to a very exhausting experience. So that is the reality for many, many, many of our coaches, and we just want to ensure that that's shared ahead of time. That this by no means will feel like any type of vacation. It's a very busy week. There's a lot of emotions coming up, and a lot of sort of stresses that you may not see. The same time, it's super enjoyable. It's a really fun time. And if you love coaching, which hopefully, if you're on this call, I would hope that you do, you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So we just want to, at this time, ensure that we're starting to think about over the next 4 months, have you built in time away from your team and program? So we did see some coaches in the last round, fully commit to their programs and athletes, which we have to do, but fully commit does not mean 7 days a week, your entire day is thinking about that program. Ensuring that over the next few months, spending time with family, friends, whoever it is in your life that is not your team and your program is a healthy habit. Setting our own healthy habits. I hope we're good at this, but it's so easy to get off track. So taking care of your own nutrition and physical health now, and then thinking forward into the games. And I'm going to ask you guys to start thinking about that now. What are the routines that you have now that help you perform as a person that you will need to carry into the games? And what I'll ask is that you please plan and build those into your own plan now. And so some of the questions to start asking, what the athletes get access to their play space and whatever, but what about your own exercise? So during the games, where are you going to go work out? Where are you going to go for a walk? What access and time do you have to do the things that you normally do? And what we do see with coaches is that when that's well thought out and those routines carry into the games, those coaches are high performers. When you come into the games and suddenly you change your own schedule and you're not working out, and you're not doing the things that you're used to doing, we do see that performance can quickly struggle with the coaches. So please just start asking those questions now and start figuring out what you're going to need. Great quote from one of our mental performance consultants, Danielle, who's also been to the games herself in multiple capacities. She said, teams don't perform well when coaches lose their focus and composure. Know your own blind spots and develop strategies to ensure they don't negatively affect the team's performance. And really, in what she was talking about there was developing your own mental performance plan, your own routines, and your own really focusing on you. And that famous saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. So asking you all now to figure out what's going to fill your cup before you go to the games. The last thing I'm going to get you to do right now is I'm going to get you to think for maybe 30 seconds and put into the chat, what's one thing you'll commit to do for yourself over the next month? And if you don't feel comfortable putting in the chat, that's fine. Share it with someone, because what we do know is we do what we say we promise we'll do, and we share out loud. So if you wouldn't mind sharing it in the chat, great. If not, write it down and share it with someone. But what are you going to commit to for you over the next month? I'll give you guys about 30 more seconds. Thanks for sharing, Danny. Awesome. Yep. Walks. Love to see walks, getting some physical activity in there. Scheduling downtime, fantastic. Running schedule, awesome one, Peggy. And so figuring out at the games, where's a good place that you can go? How can you access it? What is your time? And then over the next month, keeping up with that. That's awesome. Awesome one, Brad. Oof. Yeah, that's always a struggle, but a great one. Leaving my work at work for those that aren't looking at the chat. Fantastic. Okay. So thank you guys for sharing. If you haven't put it in, keep putting it in. It is nice to see. And the reason I asked you guys to share, it's nice to see what others are doing. Sometimes for anyone on the line that doesn't have, couldn't think of anything, you can sometimes kind of steal and beg and borrow from our colleagues online. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. No, I'm going to start this one. Sorry, aren't I, Andrew? Yeah, my bad. Okay, so we're going to briefly talk about selection here. I'm going to ask you guys use your thumbs up one more time. Who has, actually, sorry, I need to expand so I can see everyone. Who has completed their selections so that you have selected your final team going to the games? Awesome. 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. A few more. I'm going to leave it there. 4. Perfect. And 2 at least are in the same sport. Okay. Aaron, do you have a question? Or was that your?
No, I was just trying to put my hand
Yeah.
in.
All good. Okay. So it looks like we have 2, maybe 3 sports that have selected final teams. That's about where we thought it was. So good. We're going to cover some stuff that might help the rest of you. I'm going to make the assumption then, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, please. The rest of you guys would have a core team, probably narrowed down, but you still have selection to make to get to the final group. That be correct? Yep. Okay, got some thumbs up. Awesome. Well, Andrew, we correctly assumed where everyone would be. So that's great. We're going to continue on. So what we're going to do today, we didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty detail with selection because we do know that we are pretty far into the process. So I will hope that most of you do have selection policies in place, protocols, that selection documents have been created. What I will add is that we're going to just briefly touch on some best practices for those that are still moving into that final phase. And if you would like any more detail or need some support with this selection phase, that you reach out to Andrew or I, and we can more detailed get into the nitty gritty and support you in that way, so that what we're going to cover right now is really meant to be just high level. And again, we have some sports on the line who are already done selection. So you can just sort of have a listen, and I may ask you to give some commentary back as well if you had anything that worked well or didn't work well. So just briefly, for those who have not done so, we're just going to go over a few different ways that those selection documents can be created or should be created. And hopefully, if you're not into final selection, if you need to make some tweaks, you're able to do so right now. So we have our quantified approach. So these are the selection protocols that you might have that are chosen solely based on results or other measurable aspects that allow you to directly compare your athletes. So you're looking at apples to apples. So this could be individual athlete sprinting score, or in snowboard, for example, it would be like your finishes, your results. So athlete A finished first at these 3 events ahead of athlete B, and you're comparing apples to apples with that. Your qualitative selection documents are generally chosen based on characteristics or things that may not be as easily measured. So these documents are looking at things like commitment to the team, how they fit into the culture of the team, maybe the effort that was put in. So they're things that we as coaches can see, and we can feel that, yes, this athlete A, did more than athlete B, but they may not be able to be exactly measured. And even some of those, so commitment could be measured in some aspects based on who showed up to what, time put in, that sort of thing. But they're generally seen as things that are, more difficult to see on paper, in numbers. And then we have selections that are done with a mix of both. And so what we wanted to quickly talk about today is those are really the strongest selection documents that we've seen over time, are the ones that build in a little bit of both. So if you're not done your documents yet, have a quick look and see, what is your selection document based on? Does it have some quantifiable numbers? So is it based on something tangible that the parents and athletes can say, yep, results, or speed or some measurement? And then are there qualitative aspects to allow, a little bit of you building your team and ensuring that you have the best athletes that you feel will be able to perform? Because there are a lot of factors. And that mix gives the ability to directly compare something, you have a measurement, while also giving the flexibility to incorporate desired qualities like perhaps coachability, commitment, and these other aspects. And the goal for us with any selection protocol coming into the Canada Games is really to ensure that your program doesn't have to deal with appeals. So appeals, so when a selection document isn't super clear and you get a bunch of appeals, that's really the hardest, most stressful thing for you as a coach to go through. So you've gone through all the work of making those selections. That's hard. That's emotional. Then you go through an appeal. That's a whole new process that can cause a lot of stress for both the coach and all of the athletes going through that. So the goal out of all of this is to make it as tight as possible so that at the end you have no appeals. Everyone knew what to expect. As far as timing, at 4 months out, which is about where we are now, you're really at the point that the sooner the better. So the sooner is the better to have these documents should really already be out at this time. If they're not, getting them out now. And selecting that team as soon as you can so that it has the chance, the team itself has the chance to get to know you as the coach, know your assistant coaches. I also understand that some sports have not finalized their coaching team yet. So that's difficult. If that's not confirmed yet, it's difficult to move forward, but hopefully that'll happen soon. We do have a few examples where selections are done late. So one example was in my own sport of snowboarding. So an example is in the snowboard season, the last event that we would have experienced would have been last March. So you're thinking March 2022. Well, if I was to select now, I wouldn't have seen my athletes compete since March of 2022. And a young teenage athlete has changed a lot in that period from March until now. They've grown a lot and they're not back on snow yet. So what we would do in our sport would be run a number of camps and things on snow December, January, and have the selection at the end of January. So there are some sports where that sort of 1 month out from the games, which is pretty late, but the selection is made at that time because they're not able to do so any sooner than that. I will say, even with the Olympic teams that we deal with in our office, we won't get into the nitty gritty. There's lots of different ways that you could look at selecting the best athlete 2 days before because they're going to be the one to perform at the games versus selecting them a few months out. A lot of different ways of thinking about that, but in general, I'll say it is nice to name your team as early as you can, get them tight, get them to know you, get them to feel comfortable with the opportunity. And Andrew, I'll turn it over to you for some more details.
Awesome. Thank you. Some of your teams, you're going to have alternates on the teams. And there was a team in Niagara who had an alternate on the team, but the responsibilities of that alternate, or what was expected of that alternate, including the fact that they weren't going to the games, was not made clear. And that, as you can appreciate, caused a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of upset athletes and in turn parents. It's extremely important that if you have an alternate on your team, to communicate to the alternate what is that role on the team, communicate the fact that they, in most sports, they're not going to the games. And my advice would be, when working with the alternates, give them additional responsibilities, things that they can do to help support that team and feel that they're a part of the team, even if they're not going. And then in terms of communication of the decisions, you have to remember that in both ways, the athletes that you're selecting and the athletes that didn't make the team, that there's going to be a lot of emotions going back and forth one way or the other. So number one, communicating this all at once, if at all possible. So perhaps it's sending out an email to everybody at the same time, not the same email, but you have multiple emails set up and you hit send all at once. Perhaps it's following up and having phone call conversations with the athletes that weren't selected, whatever that process is in your mind, thinking about that before you go and communicate those decisions. As well, we strongly recommend having a 24-hour rule in place. So if you select a team, the athletes who haven't made, explain in the email, explain in however you communicate, that there's a 24-hour window, almost a cooling off period. because what can happen and what we've seen happen with a couple of different teams at the 2019 games in Red Deer was that cooling off period didn't exist. So the coach made decisions and immediately coach's phone was ringing. Immediately coach's inbox blew up. A lot of emotions go, especially on the negative side, and it wasn't planned for. So to create that 24-hour cooling period, and also recognizing that some of your athletes, in particular the ones who haven't made the team, they're going to ask for feedback because perhaps isn't there an opportunity for them to play on a provincial team, or perhaps they're young enough to play at the next Canada Games. So be ready and prepared to be able to provide that feedback in a meaningful way, showing some empathy, because again, there's a lot of emotions at play, but really it's having that communications plan in place already before you select your team.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and share a different screen. So what I'm going to share briefly now is just the first few minutes of a video that we did with Marika Nell. So Marika is one of our tennis coaches, and she also has been to a couple games. And in this video, we're just showing the first 3 minutes. But if anyone wants to see the full video and have all the details, I'll be sending the link. We threw it on YouTube privately, so you can have the link to the entire video. It's about 10 minutes long. But she speaks about what that blended approach can look like. So I will preface that in the case of tennis, they went with a mixture selection protocol. So it includes some quantitative, some qualitative, mostly qualitative. So I'm not saying I suggest that. This was done specifically because of a culture in their sport at that time. And she speaks a little bit as to why. So in this case, they did 15% of their selection protocol was quantitative and the 85% was qualitative. That isn't normal. So that's why I just wanted to share with the group. Normally it would be more of a 50-50 or 60-40 split. But still really good to look at if your final selection protocol isn't yet in place, or even if the document is in place, but you don't have exactly how you're choosing athlete A over B. It's a nice little video to demonstrate one way that you can do it using a scorecard. The advantage of the scorecard is what we talked about that Andrew just went through, that clarity and the ability to hopefully answer all the questions and have it very clearly laid out to athletes and parents to avoid any appeals. And they did not have any appeals after the use of this tool, which is huge. Knowing that in the games before this, when they did not have the scorecard, they actually had an appeal that then became a legal appeal. So that's what we want to avoid. So I'm just going to quickly, can you guys see, Andrew, can you confirm you can see the, yeah, okay. Hopefully let me know if you can't hear the audio, okay, but it should work. Can you hear the audio? No? Oh,
No.
1 sec. Okay, 1 second. Why not? Sorry guys, 1 sec. Try this. Can you now?
The main piece of advice that had been given to us, myself and the assistant coach manager, was to set out criteria that are as objective as possible. As little as possible of anybody's opinion or soft criteria that wasn't clear. So, to be super clear about your selection criteria and how you get to that, we set up an actual scorecard that counted out of 100 points. For several reasons. One of the main reasons at the time was the culture in tennis. I think this exists in other sports as well, where our tennis players have a bit of a loser mentality when they draw opponents from the 4 big provinces in tennis, which are the same as in some of the other sports. So Alberta, Quebec, BC, and Ontario. When our players go to nationals and they draw a player from one of those provinces, they almost automatically give up. So to address that attitude and that whole mentality, we realized it was important for us to get the buy-in from the parents as well. So we sat them all down, we first devised the scorecard, then we had a meeting before the last 2 phases of our selection process started. We divided it up into 2 periods of time. Sat the parents down and said, this is how it's going to work. I was their head coach at the time. I wanted to emphasize resilience and team player mentality. Tennis isn't really a team sport. It's a very individual sport, but you need for this event team player mentality. So we came up with a way how to integrate that into the scorecard. Okay, so it was important for the parents to hear that because they're soft in the way they raise their kids sometimes, how to make excuses for them when they lose or when they have injuries. That's one of my pet peeves, two of my pet peeves. When the parents help to excuse losses or why the player underperformed, number one, and number two, injuries, because it's such a backdoor. Okay, so we built all of that into the scorecard. Some of the criteria that's hard to quantify, you have to put to numbers. It really helped us to make it this black and white. There it is, 100 points, and they're made up like that. Ranking and results, which in the past were the main criteria, were only worth 15 out of 100 points. They're still there, but they're underemphasized because attendance, showing up to all the training camps and sessions was pointless for us to try and build a team if everybody wasn't there. So attendance to training sessions, camps, tournaments even were built in there. And then the resilience factor and this team player or doubles, which in tennis is hard to measure because people play with different partners, they play different tournaments. So those are the factors which to us were most important. This resilience factor, I made the players read a book or watch a movie about a typical underdog sports story about an individual or team. They had to summarize that, and I asked a few questions. Why do you identify with this athlete or team? Specifically, which characteristics is it that impressed you? For example,
So I'll just stop there. She does get into, like I said, far more detail about how did she measure resilience, how all of the different scores broke down. You'll see she had like 4 sheets up that she talks through. I just wanted to share that first part just with everybody, in that she speaks really clearly as well to the communication with parents and setting that expectation. So that's what we felt was relevant. Again, if you want access to the full video, we have it, because if you're not done yet, there is a lot more great information that is available on it. And I'm just going to go back. Sorry, I just have to share. Not so quick at this. Andrew, let me know when I share the right screen again. I think it's this one. Yep. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And we're going to jump right back into it. And I think, yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Perfect. So let's talk about communication. You've selected your team. What does communication now look like? What is the method of that communication? Who is it that you're communicating with? If it's to athletes, and we put U18 there in brackets, because once the athlete turns 19, 20 in some sports, communication can be a little bit different. Are you involving parents in that communication? Being perfectly clear, I worked with a team in Niagara, and the line of communication to the athletes and parents wasn't made clear. And then less than 10 days before the games, that caused a variety of issues. And being as clear and detailed as possible. I don't know, perhaps you're sometimes like me when I'm reading emails from my kids' coaches. Sometimes I'm reading it in a rush. I sometimes don't read every single detail. Expect to have some follow-up, even if you already included in the email. I will admit I am sometimes guilty of that. So it's really just having the communication piece as clear as possible. In terms of expectations, these games in particular are going to be unique for our Atlantic Canadian coaches and athletes. So what are the expectations from now into the games in terms of attendance, in terms of what's expected from the athlete, in terms of how many times a week are you training? During the games, what does technology look like? Does your team have a cell phone policy? If they don't, I strongly suggest that you do, and I'm more than happy to help with that if you don't. Access to friends and family, and this is also includes parents as well. What does that look like? We expect that because these games are in PEI are very close, we expect a lot of parents, if not all the parents of your athletes, to be there. It's not quite as simple as, okay, game's over, I'm going to take Emily and Susie and we're going to go off to go get lunch, or they're going to spend the night with us in a hotel outside. That, a couple of those scenarios just can't happen for a variety of reasons. So what does access to family and friends look like? Is there some time that you can plan on perhaps an off day in your schedule to be able to work into that? And then again, during the game's schedule. So perhaps during an off day, you're going to go cheer on Team Nova Scotia, perhaps hockey, for example, or perhaps go and cheer on the ringette team, so on and so forth. What does that look like? How are you planning your downtime? Because there's lots of stuff going on. And if you have a large team, perhaps a team of a dozen or more athletes, if you don't plan that downtime, what will end up happening is you'll have 5 athletes here, 6 athletes there, so on. So your athletes will be all over the place. And then for the parents as well, like I mentioned earlier, they're probably going to be at these games. What does access to their son or daughter look like? What are times when it's just strictly team only? Again, building these pieces into the culture of your team, into the rules of your team, so on and so forth. Lay out those expectations now. In Niagara, we had some parents who decided very last minute that they were going to take their kids to a Blue Jays game. The issue with it was, number one, that wasn't communicated to the coaches or mission staff. And number two, there was no way to go to the Blue Jays game and get back to the village before curfew. So breaking curfew, is, I'm sure the experienced coaches know, is a very big deal. And obviously something that we want to avoid. So it's building that into schedule. What even things like, what time is bedtime? What time is downtime? The host society will have those rules in effect, but perhaps you have a game the next day at 9 a.m. that involves 45 minutes worth of travel to get there. So it's an early wake up time. Maybe you want to set your own bedtimes and curfews. That's fine, but planning that in advance is extremely important. So I will pass it back over to Natasha, who will go over the next slide.
Yeah. So again, what Andrew said really rolls into this planning. So we are asking you at this point, 4 months out, there's a lot more planning that can take place. And what I'm going to quickly touch on now is, what are the planning priorities at 4 months out? So there's definitely some of the things that Andrew just touched on, like expectations, but in your actual training plans and what you're doing with the athletes, what are some of the priorities at this time? So you're currently, all of you, since you're winter sport, you'd be moving into the competitive phase of your yearly training plan. So right now you're probably in like pre-competitive phase. Again, depends on your sport. Most of you would be in that, but quickly moving into your competitive phase with the games coming up. You've only got a few macro cycles left. So those bigger blocks that are about a month long in most YTPs, only time for a couple more of those to fit into our planning. So what are some of the things that you're unlikely to be able to do right now? You're unlikely to make major strength gains with your teams. You're unlikely to change major physiology at this time, 4 months out, make major technical changes, and learn to apply new mental strategies. So I'm definitely not trying to be negative. I highlight those things to ask all of our coaches on the line that are maybe first time planning into a Canada Games to not put all your time and effort into those things, knowing that it's unlikely, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely to make major changes in those areas. Again, trying to speed up learning. The reason we share that is we have seen and learned from other coaches in past cycles who tried to, at this point, hire a strength coach and make major strength gains before the games, and doing the debrief with them. It's almost sad when they say, I tried to do this and what I learned was, you're not able to do it at this point. And speaking to our physiologist, our lead physiologist on this, it's a lot of coaches do believe you can make changes this late. It's pretty unlikely. I also spoke to one of our mental performance coaches who said, and you can see this in the focus on, you can learn a new basic mental skill at this time. So at 4 months out, it's a good time to learn something like a relaxation technique, a new focusing technique, but you're highly unlikely to learn an advanced mental skill or really be able to apply it in a pressured situation. So that's what we're trying to highlight right here, is just sort of, where you can put your focus versus maybe not putting your focus in other areas. So where you could put some focus, if you're not already doing this on this time, making solid nutritional choices. So if you have access to a nutritionist, I know all the provinces are different in what they have for support, but if you have access to a nutritionist or access to just good nutritional advice, great time to give that to your athletes and go over it. maintaining your current physiology and preventing injuries. So it is certainly a good time to keep doing whatever the athletes were doing as far as physical prep and preventing injury, or starting some new things like yoga, some more injury prevention techniques. It's an excellent time to work on tactical plays and approaches with your teams and individual sports as well. I know have a lot of tactical aspects. It's a good time to practice the mental strategies that they already have. And it can be a good time to learn a new mental skill. As far as the amount that you're doing at this time, it's a great time to be in a pretty high volume phase. So this is a time where you should have quite a bit of access to your athletes, I would hope, and that you're getting the volume in now and fluctuating your intensity. So depending on the skill being taught and the load that you have on your athletes at this time, it's a great time for high volume and some intensity fluctuations. And then we'll speak about in the next couple webinars more what does that look like in like the last 8 weeks. So we're still looking at 4 months out. Depending on what happens from now to the Christmas holidays, I'm going to leave you with the question of how long do you need to have them maintain over the Christmas holidays, and when do you start again? Because this is something that's unique to you guys as winter sport, and I was a winter sport coach. You suddenly have a break right in the middle of your cycle. So a break that can be hard to break. So every family generally would like at least a few days off over Christmas. What have you thought about in that time? What does your program look like? A break is healthy for everyone. Have you thought of what's done ahead of time? So maybe some extra intensity ahead of time to carry them through that break over the games. And when do you start again after the games? And has that been communicated? All right, Andrew, and you guys, we have about 2 slides left. So if you can hang on the last few minutes, go ahead, Andrew.
Perfect. I promise I will be quick, respecting everyone's time to wrap this up at 1. So let's talk about integrated support team. Definition: team of sport professionals in place to support coaches and athletes. Usually what it looks like at a provincial level, that you have a nutritionist, a strength coach, and a mental performance coach. But it can also include some of those items at the bottom. The key word here, though, is integrate. For them to have an effect on performance, they need to know your athletes and be part of the day-to-day environment. And also, as a side note, if your team is currently not working with an integrated support team, chances are if you just start now, the impact will be very little. The nutritionist, for example, can have a big impact on that in terms of what to eat pre and post game. In terms of a mental performance coach, and speaking with a couple that we have at the Institute, they can teach 1, maybe 2 basic mental performance skills, but that will be largely the impact that they're able to have. But if you don't have access to an IST, you can just also surround yourself with support. So that's your assistant coaches and managers. It could also be your mission staff. One thing that I will say, in particular with Team New Brunswick, they did a fantastic job supporting their teams. Even though they weren't directly a part of the team, they did a fantastic job supporting their teams, both in the field of play and off the field of play. Our coaching support staff. So myself and Natasha, I will be at the games for both weeks. Natasha is going to join us in week 2. We are here to help you. So by all means, we are going to reach out directly to our Nova Scotia coaches, but to our New Brunswick and PEI coaches too. If you see us in passing at the games, by all means, reach out. If you need somebody to even vent to, I've done that at past games as well. So happy to help support in whatever way possible. And using past coaches for support. So when I was involved with the 2019 selection of the teams, once both teams were named, we used the coaches from past games for advice to the coaches that were going. So using past games for support is also great as well. So going to our last slide.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to skip to this one, Andrew, so we can get this done. Yeah.
Perfect. So what we want to know is specifically, what are you hoping to get out of this in November? So we've opened up a Mentee. So if you go to mentee.com and use that code on your screen, or use the QR code, so bring your phone up to the screen, highlight that QR code, it will take you right there. We want to know, what are you hoping to get out of your time in November? So you not only can use the Mentee, you can also use the chat if that's easy for you. If you'd rather, we're going to put up our email addresses here in a moment here once we get the Mentee up.
Yeah.
feel free to reach out to us because, again, we are here to support you. It's more than just learn. We're here to facilitate, and we want to see all the teams be as successful as possible for you to reach your full potential. So I will hand things back over to Natasha to wrap up.
Yeah, I was just checking that the Menti's up and going. So it should be open, but I just have to get out of it to make sure that it is. And then what I will do is, oh my goodness, it's not letting me exit. I'm going to stop share for a sec. Sorry, you guys. So if you didn't get the Menti code, maybe Andrew, you can.
I will copy and paste share in the chat here.
Yeah, because I just need to bring the Menti up, not be sharing my screen. So we'll keep it open there. We've got some people responding. Thank you. We will keep it open for a few minutes. So after we stop the call, but we really want to hear what you'd like to hear in November. In the other, so if there's something listed that you don't see that you would really like more information about, just throw it in the chat right now and we will keep the chat open of this Zoom call and we will capture it. So we want to be able to tailor, we have our ideas, you know, what we could offer in November and December, but we would really like it to be tailored to those that are going to come. So please share anything that you feel you would like more information on that you don't already have. And then with that, I'm just going to share our last slide, which is our contact information. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to come to today and spending the time with us online. And if you have questions between now and November, there's a lot going on, or you have questions, you know, really at any time. Oh, Andrew's putting them in the chat too. Please reach out to us. We are here for you guys. We would like to answer questions. And if anyone has a few minutes, stay online. I will stay online for a few minutes and you can certainly just ask them in here. So with that, I'll let those of you that have to run right at 1, thank you for coming, and we'll hopefully see you in November. And anyone that can stay online, we will stay online with you. And thank you.
Thanks, guys.
No problem. Thank you. So yeah, if any of you guys have